John Mitchell had always felt like an outsider. Growing up in a small town in Arizona, he had lived his life according to other people's expectations. His parents, his teachers, and even his friends seemed to have a roadmap for him: graduate school, get a steady job, settle down, get married, and live out the rest of his life in the same predictable way. But John had never felt at home in that world. He had always felt the pull of something deeper, something far away from the routine of everyday life. He knew that something was missing, but he wasn't sure what it was. One day, as he sat on the porch of his modest home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the weight of his life began to feel heavier than usual. The noise of the world outside his front door, the demands of his job, and the constant pressure to conform all seemed suffocating. He felt a deep longing to escape it all. The thought had been building for some time, but now, in that quiet moment, it became overwhelming. He needed to get away. He needed to be alone, to disconnect from the world, and find something that could help him understand who he truly was, beyond the expectations others had placed on him. Without a second thought, John decided to take a leave from his job and set out on an adventure. It wasn't going to be a typical vacation. He wasn't interested in beaches or cities or popular tourist destinations. What he craved was complete solitude, a chance to reconnect with himself and nature. He knew the desert, with its vast emptiness, was the place he needed. The desert had always fascinated him: its vast open spaces, its beauty, and the way it seemed to demand silence and introspection. It was a place where one could disappear, where the noise of the world could fade away, and where a person could find peace. The next morning, John packed his gear: a few days' worth of food, water, a map, and a journal, and headed out toward the wilderness. He drove for hours, passing through the small towns and roads that slowly disappeared into the nothingness of the desert. The further he drove, the more the world seemed to fall away. The towns grew smaller, the roads less traveled, and soon he was in a vast, open space, where the land stretched out endlessly in all directions. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and the sun beat down relentlessly, casting sharp shadows on the dry earth. John had spent time in the desert before, but this time was different. He wasn't just passing through. He was entering a world where he could truly be alone, where he could escape from the noise of his past and find a new sense of peace. He was determined to stay for as long as it took to find what he was looking for, even if it meant being in complete isolation for weeks, or maybe even months. The thought of being completely disconnected from the world felt freeing, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The first few days were exactly what John had hoped for. He set up a small camp, built a fire, and spent his days wandering the land, taking in the beauty of the desert, the endless horizon, the red and orange rocks, and the sharp contrast of the sun against the dark shadows gave him a sense of serenity that he hadn't felt in years. At night, the stars above were clearer than anything he had ever seen before, and the silence was so profound that it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. For the first time in a long while, John felt at peace. But as the days passed, something began to change. At first, it was subtle. A small feeling in the pit of his stomach. A sense that something was missing. He didn't know what it was, but he began to notice it more and more. The solitude that had felt so peaceful at first began to feel a little too quiet. The emptiness of the desert, the vast stretches of land with no sign of life, began to feel overwhelming. There was no one to talk to, no one to share his thoughts with. The silence, once comforting, became isolating. He found himself staring at the fire late into the night, wondering what he was really searching for. It was then that John realized that perhaps he wasn't just looking for solitude. He was looking for meaning. He had always thought that being alone would give him the answers he needed. But now he wasn't so sure. Maybe what he really wanted was connection with nature, with himself, and with something larger than him. But how could he find that in a place as empty as the desert? The feeling grew stronger each day. The desert, as beautiful as it was, began to feel cold and indifferent. John found himself yearning for the sound of a voice, the comfort of another human being, The idea of being alone in the wilderness had seemed like a romantic notion, something that would bring him the clarity he sought. But now, in the quiet of the desert, he began to feel more and more like an outsider, an intruder in a world that didn't care whether he was there or not. One morning, as he set out for a long hike, he noticed something in the distance. It was small at first, just a speck on the horizon. But as he drew closer, it became clearer there was someone out there. John's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to encounter anyone out here. The desert was supposed to be empty, a place where people didn't wander. But there, in the distance, was a figure moving toward him. As he approached, he saw that it was a woman. She was tall, with dark hair, and a strong, confident presence. Her clothes were simple but practical, a reflection of someone who knew how to survive in the harsh desert environment. She was walking toward him, her gaze steady and unwavering. When they finally came face to face, she didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, her eyes dark and intense, as though she was trying to figure him out. John stood still, unsure of what to say. He had come out here to be alone, to find peace in the solitude. And now, here was a stranger in the middle of nowhere. He didn't know whether to be wary or grateful. She didn't look like she was a threat, but the encounter was so unexpected that he didn't know how to react. The woman broke the silence first. "You're far from the roads," she said in a low, steady voice. "What brings you to this place?" John hesitated, still taken aback by her sudden appearance. "I'm just passing through," he said, his voice sounding a little more uncertain than he intended. "I needed some time alone." She nodded as though she understood. But there was something in her eyes that suggested she wasn't fooled. "The desert can give you solitude, but it also takes from you," she said. Her words simple, but heavy. "It will show you the truth, but only if you're ready to see it." John didn't know what to make of her words, but they struck him deeply. He had come to the desert seeking answers, but now he wondered if the desert itself would challenge him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Who was this woman? Why was she out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no sign of a group or camp? And why did he feel such a strong pull toward her, as if her presence had awakened something in him that had been dormant for a long time? He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was no coincidence. The woman, with her quiet strength and her words that seemed to cut to the heart of his journey, had appeared at a time when he was questioning everything. The desert had not only offered him solitude, it had now brought him face to face with a new possibility, someone who seemed to know exactly what he was searching for. John didn't realize it then, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The desert had a way of surprising those who thought they understood it. And just when he thought he had come here to be alone, he had found someone who would challenge his understanding of solitude, and perhaps even show him what true connection could be. John stared at the woman, unsure of what to say. Her presence was strong, like the desert itself, quiet but imposing, mysterious yet unyielding. Her dark eyes studied him intently, as if she could see right through him. He felt vulnerable, exposed in a way he hadn't experienced before. The solitude he had so eagerly sought was suddenly interrupted by this stranger, and yet he couldn't deny that something about her seemed familiar, like a part of the world he had been searching for but hadn't known how to find. She didn't wait for him to speak, though. Instead, she simply turned and began walking in the direction she had come from, without looking back. John stood there for a moment, frozen, the sun beating down on him as the wind stirred the dust around his feet. There was a strange pull in his chest, a feeling that he had to follow her. It was as if his encounter with her was more than a mere coincidence, like it was somehow meant to happen. After a brief hesitation, John began to walk after her, his feet crunching against the dry earth. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to follow. Was it curiosity? Or was it something deeper? Something his heart recognized before his mind could understand? He didn't know. But he couldn't shake the sense that he was meant to go with her, to see where she was leading him. She walked with a quiet confidence, each step purposeful, as though she was completely in control of her surroundings. John had never seen anyone move through the desert so effortlessly. It was as if she had lived there all her life, a part of the land itself. He tried to catch up, his breath growing heavier as he quickened his pace to match hers. After a few moments, the woman stopped. She turned to face him, her gaze never faltering. "You're not from here," she said, her voice calm, but firm. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. John nodded, unsure of how to respond. It felt like she could see right into his soul, like she knew more about him than he knew about himself. "I'm just passing through," John replied finally, his voice hesitant. "I needed some time alone to think." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering his words. "You may think you came here to be alone," she said softly. "But the desert has a way of showing you things you didn't expect. It gives you solitude, yes, but it also gives you truth, if you're willing to face it." John felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about her words that struck him deeply. He had come to the desert seeking answers, but he hadn't expected the desert to challenge him in this way. It was as if the land itself, through this woman, was speaking to him, urging him to confront something he hadn't even known he needed to face. "I don't know what you mean," John admitted, feeling a bit lost. "I just wanted to get away from everything. I thought the desert would give me some peace, some time to figure things out." The woman's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Peace is something you find within yourself," she said. "The desert won't give it to you. But if you listen closely, if you pay attention, it will help you find what you need." John didn't fully understand what she meant, but there was something about her tone, something about the way she spoke, that made him want to listen. He had no idea who she was, or what she was doing out here. But it was clear she was no ordinary traveler. She seemed connected to the desert in a way that was both deep and mysterious. It was as if she had lived through the land's secrets. And now, she was offering him a glimpse into them. For the rest of the day, the two of them walked in silence. The woman moved with a grace and purpose that John couldn't help but admire. She seemed to know every inch of the land, every path, every rock, every tree. She didn't need to consult a map or a compass. She was guided by something deeper. Something that connected her to the desert in a way that seemed beyond human understanding. As they walked, John found himself thinking more and more about what she had said. The desert was a place of solitude, yes, but it was also a place of raw, untamed power. It had the ability to break a person down and build them back up again, to show them who they truly were, whether they were ready for it or not. John had come out here to escape, to leave behind the world and its expectations, but he hadn't realized how much he was running from. And now, with the woman's words echoing in his mind, he began to wonder if he had come to the desert to face something he had been avoiding for far too long. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink, the woman led him to a small, rocky outcrop. The view was breathtaking, vast, rolling hills of desert, stretching out as far as the eye could see. The mountains in the distance casting long shadows over the land. It was a view that made John feel small, but also incredibly alive. There was something humbling about the sheer vastness of the desert, something that made him realize how insignificant his worries and concerns had seemed in the grand scheme of things. The woman sat down on a large rock, her posture relaxed but watchful, as if she were waiting for something. John hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to sit beside her or remain standing. But there was something about the way she held herself, something that made him feel like he could trust her, like she understood more than anyone else he had ever met. Finally, he sat down beside her, his legs stretched out in front of him as he took in the landscape. The wind was picking up now, rustling the dry leaves and carrying the scent of the desert on the air. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time since he had arrived, John felt a sense of calm settle over him. It was as though the weight he had been carrying with him, the weight of his life and his choices, was starting to lift. He felt lighter, as though the desert was washing away the layers of confusion and doubt that had built up inside him over the years. After a long pause, the woman spoke again, her voice breaking the silence. "What are you running from?" she asked, her words direct and unflinching. It wasn't an accusation, just a simple question. John looked at her, surprised by the question. He had never really thought about it that way before. He had come to the desert to find peace. Yes, but also to escape from the world that had always seemed too demanding, too confining. But what was he really running from? "I guess," he began, his voice trailing off as he tried to put his feelings into words. "I guess I was running from everything. The expectations, the responsibilities, the life that everyone else expected me to have. I didn't want to be stuck in that anymore. I wanted to be free." The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "Freedom is something you have to find within yourself. It's not about escaping the world. It's about facing it and choosing how to live in it. The desert can give you solitude, but it can't give you freedom. That's something only you can give yourself." John listened to her words carefully, feeling as though they were sinking deep into his soul. She was right, of course. He had been running, not just from the world, but from himself. And now, as he sat there in the quiet desert, he was beginning to understand that true freedom didn't come from running away. It came from facing the things he had been avoiding and learning to live with them. As the night began to fall and the stars started to appear one by one in the dark sky, John realized that his journey in the desert had only just begun. He hadn't found the answers he was looking for yet, but he had found something far more important. The realization that the desert and this woman were showing him a new way to see the world. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he had been searching for all along. The days that followed felt like a slow awakening for John. He had come to the desert to escape, to seek solace in the quiet emptiness. But now, with the woman's presence beside him, everything was beginning to change. He had started out searching for peace, but he was realizing that what he needed most wasn't silence, it was understanding, connection, and perhaps even healing. Each day, as they traveled together through the desert, John found himself more and more drawn to her. Tala, he had learned her name, was nothing like anyone he had ever met before. She was strong and composed, never hurried, always moving with purpose and grace. Her movements were fluid, like she was in tune with the desert, as if the land itself whispered to her and guided her steps. It wasn't just that she seemed knowledgeable about the desert, though. It was the way she saw the world, her ability to be both fiercely independent and yet completely open to whatever the world had to offer. John admired that. He had always thought of himself as someone who had to figure things out on his own, never really trusting anyone else's help or advice. But Tala was different. She didn't tell him what to do or try to fix him. Instead, she asked questions that made him think, encouraged him to reflect on his life, and most importantly, made him feel that his feelings and struggles mattered. That wasn't something he had felt in a long time. They spent their days walking side by side, mostly in silence. Sometimes they would talk about the land, the plants, the animals, the skies above them each new day, revealing more about the desert's beauty and harshness. Other times, they would say nothing at all, letting the stillness envelop them. John found a strange comfort in this quiet companionship. It wasn't like the silence he had expected, one that would leave him feeling more isolated. This silence felt full, filled with meaning and understanding. With Tala, he didn't feel alone. In fact, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Tala had told him stories about her people, how they had lived in the desert for centuries, learning to respect and survive the harsh conditions. She spoke of her family, her tribe, with both pride and sadness, as though the land they called home had shaped their lives in ways that were difficult to put into words. John listened to her carefully, drawn into her world with each story she shared. She spoke of resilience, of battles fought and lost, of love that had survived generations. It was clear that the desert was not just a physical space for her, it was a place of deep cultural significance, a land that held her people's history and their connection to the earth. For John, Listening to her was like stepping into a world that was both foreign and familiar. He had never known a life like hers, but he found himself understanding more than he expected. Perhaps it was the way she spoke so openly, without fear of judgment, or perhaps it was the honesty in her voice. Tala didn't shy away from the difficult parts of her past, and in that, John saw a reflection of himself. He had always been hesitant to talk about his own struggles, his doubts, and his fears. But Tala made it seem natural, as if it was part of the human experience to face the hard truths. One evening, as they sat by a campfire beneath a sky full of stars, John found himself asking her about love. He had never really understood it, at least. Not in the way that people talked about it. He had been in relationships before, but they always felt temporary, fleeting, as if love was something you could experience but never truly hold on to. It had always seemed to him like love was something that came and went, leaving behind only memories. But with Tala, he couldn't help but wonder if love could be something different, something deeper, and more enduring. "Do you believe in love?" John asked quietly, the words coming more easily than he expected. Tala looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I believe in love," she said simply, "but not the kind of love that people often talk about. The kind of love they think is easy and smooth, like something you can possess or control. Real love isn't easy. It's wild, like the desert. It comes and goes. It tests you. It challenges you. But if you're willing to face it, if you're willing to be vulnerable, it can change you in ways you never imagined." John nodded, taking in her words. He had always thought of love as something that could be planned or controlled, something that would fit neatly into his life. But Tala was showing him that love wasn't something you could predict. It was unpredictable, fierce, and transformative. It was something that required both strength and surrender, both patience and trust. As the days went by, their bond continued to grow. They faced challenges together. Sometimes the weather would change suddenly, the desert storms arriving without warning, or they would run low on water, forcing them to find new sources in the unforgiving terrain. But no matter what obstacles came their way, they never faltered. They were a team, each one relying on the other's strength and knowledge to survive. Tala's quiet leadership gave John confidence, and John's willingness to learn gave Tala a sense of companionship she hadn't realized she needed. Together, they were able to navigate the harshest parts of the desert with a sense of calm and understanding that was rare. One day, as they made their way across a particularly rugged stretch of desert, John began to feel a shift within himself. The doubts that had once clouded his mind, the uncertainty about his life, his purpose, his future began to fade. Being with Tala, learning from her, and walking side by side in the desert had helped him realize something important. He had come to the desert to escape, but what he had found wasn't an escape at all. It was a deeper connection to the world around him and to himself. Tala had shown him that solitude wasn't about running away from others or from his own feelings. It was about finding peace within, finding strength in vulnerability, and learning to accept life's challenges with grace. By now, John was no longer the man who had arrived in the desert weeks ago. He had shed the layers of confusion, of self-doubt, and of fear. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first started this journey. Tala had taught him to face the parts of himself that he had been avoiding, and in doing so, she had opened up a new path for him. He felt stronger, more sure of who he was, and more connected to the world than ever before. And yet, even as John felt this transformation taking place within him, he knew that he was still learning. He was still on a journey, still discovering the depths of his own soul. There was still so much he didn't understand, but he was no longer afraid of the unknown. He had come to accept that life was full of uncertainties, and that was okay. What mattered was not having all the answers, but being open to the questions. And Tala, with her wisdom and her quiet strength, had shown him that. As they camped one night beneath the stars, John couldn't help but look at her and feel a sense of gratitude. Tala had come into his life when he needed her most. She had guided him through the desert, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. She had shown him what true strength looked like, and how love, in all its forms, could heal and transform even the most broken parts of oneself. For the first time in his life, John felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. He had found a new understanding of himself, a new appreciation for the world around him, and a deep connection to a woman who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. And as the fire crackled in the night and the desert wind whispered through the air, John knew that this journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the days stretched into weeks, the desert began to feel less like an empty space and more like a home for John. The harshness of the sun, the vast stretches of open land, and the cold nights no longer seemed like obstacles. Instead, they had become parts of the landscape that he had come to understand and respect. Each element of the desert, the scorching heat during the day, the chill of the night air, the wind that swept across the plains now felt like an old friend, a companion that had been with him all along, just waiting to be noticed. John had been transformed in ways he hadn't expected. His time with Tala had reshaped his thinking. He had come to the desert to escape, to hide from his own life and its complications. But he was starting to realize that running away from things never really solves anything. Instead of finding simple answers, he had found a deeper understanding of himself. The challenges he had faced alongside Tala had revealed things about his own character that he had never fully acknowledged before. He had discovered strength he hadn't known he had, and he had learned the value of vulnerability. But even more than that, he had found something he hadn't anticipated: connection. The connection with Tala had become more than just companionship. It was a bond, a partnership that transcended words. There was an understanding between them that didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was in the way she looked at him when he was uncertain, the quiet reassurance she gave him when the desert seemed overwhelming, and it was in the way he began to see her not just as a guide or a teacher, but as someone who had become a part of his own journey. John had always been someone who kept people at a distance. He had avoided opening up to others, keeping his emotions locked away, thinking that the more he kept to himself, the safer he would be. But with Tala, that defense began to crumble. Her strength and wisdom had helped him face his fears, both the ones he had been hiding from and the ones he had never fully understood. She had shown him that it wasn't weakness to open up, that sharing your struggles with someone else could be a powerful act, not just for healing but for growth. One evening, as they sat around the campfire, the glow of the flames casting shadows on the ground, John found himself looking at Tala in a way he hadn't before. The more he learned from her, the more he began to realize that this wasn't just a brief encounter. There was something deep and enduring about their connection. He had been so focused on running away from his life that he hadn't truly understood the power of being present in the moment. But now, with Tala by his side, he was starting to see that life wasn't about escaping. It was about facing what came your way, with open eyes, ready to learn from it. Tala noticed the way John was looking at her and smiled softly. It was a smile that spoke of understanding, of knowing that the time had come for them both to acknowledge what had been growing between them. Without saying a word, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his, her touch warm and reassuring. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I never thought I would find something like this," John said, his voice quiet as he looked at her. "I thought I was just looking for peace, for a way to get away from everything. But now, I see it was more than that. It was you. It's us." Tala's smile grew, and her eyes softened. She didn't need to say anything in response. Her presence was enough. They sat there for a while, the fire crackling between them. And in that silence, everything that had been left unsaid felt understood. John felt a deep sense of peace, not because the world around him had become perfect, but because he had come to accept it, and more importantly, had come to accept himself. Over the next few days, they continued their journey through the desert, moving from one landscape to the next. The terrain varied, but the connection between them remained constant. John had come to rely on Tala's strength, not just in the physical challenges of the desert, but in the way she helped him navigate the emotional and spiritual lessons that the desert was teaching him. They didn't speak about their growing feelings for each other. They didn't need to. The bond between them was evident in every moment they shared. As the time passed, John knew that he would soon have to leave the desert. He had come to the wilderness looking for answers. But now, as the end of his journey approached, he realized that the answers he had found were not as clear-cut as he had hoped. The desert had shown him that there was no one path to follow, no one way to live. Life was complicated, and the challenges were many, but the key was learning to face them with an open heart and mind. He had come to understand that his time with Tala wasn't just about learning from her, it was about learning from himself. 2. He had come to the desert thinking that he needed to escape from everything, but in the end, what he had found was not an escape, but a deeper connection to the world and to the people in it. And the connection he had found with Tala was not something he could easily walk away from. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky with vibrant shades of red and purple, John turned to Tala. They were sitting together, watching the beauty of the landscape unfold before them. He knew this moment would soon come to an end, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. He had never felt so torn before, torn between the life he had left behind and the life he had found in the desert. He had learned so much, but he couldn't stay forever. The world beyond the desert was still waiting for him, with all its demands and responsibilities. Tala, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to leave. I don't want to go back to the life I had before. Tala turned to him, her expression calm but knowing. She had seen this moment coming. She had always known that John would have to leave eventually, but she also knew that this journey had been just as much about his growth as it had been about their shared experience. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort and understanding. I know, she said softly, but you have learned everything you needed to learn. The desert showed you what you needed to see. And now, it's time for you to take what you've learned and live it. You don't have to carry the desert with you, but you will always carry the lessons it taught you. John looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of their time together. He didn't want to let go of the connection they had built, the bond that had grown between them in the midst of the harsh landscape, but he knew she was right. He had come to the desert to find something he didn't even understand, and now, he had to take that understanding back with him. It wasn't just about running away anymore, it was about finding a way to live authentically, to carry the peace and wisdom he had found in the desert into the world beyond. The next morning, after a final night under the stars, John gathered his things and said goodbye to the desert. He had come seeking solitude, but in the end, he had found something far more valuable, a connection that had transformed him. Tala was not just a guide anymore. She had become a part of his life, someone who had taught him to face himself and the world around him with courage and love. As he left the desert behind, John felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He knew that life would still be challenging, but he was no longer afraid of it. He had found the strength to face whatever came his way, and he carried the love and lessons of the desert, and Tala, with him forever in his heart.